So first, just want to thank you all for joining us for today's virtual public meeting for the US93 Polson to Summers corridor study. And we held two in-person meetings last Tuesday in Polson and yesterday in Summers, and we had close to 70 people join us for both of those. In addition to those in-person opportunities, we wanted to offer today's meeting for anyone who wasn't able to join us in person, and for those that might want to listen to a presentation and learn more about the corridor study. So welcome and thank you again for joining us. We'll start out with a few introductions. So my name is Sarah Nicolai, and I'm the project manager for Robert Petch and Associates, and we're the engineering firm that MDT contracted to assist with this study. We also have several representatives from the Montana Department of Transportation with us today, and I'll just list those folks out. So from the Department of Transportation Planning Division, we have Jackson Lang, who's a project manager for this corridor study. We have also Vicki Cernich and Samantha Wood, who are also with planning. And then from the MDT Missoula District, we have Joel Boucher, who's the Missoula District pre-construction engineer. And then I also have a colleague with me from RPA, Carrie Lynch, who is assisting with this study. So wanted to provide a presentation to you all today. We have about 15 slides. Before we get into the details, we had just a few housekeeping items to run through. So we'll start with the presentation, and then at the end we'll have a question and answer period. So while we're talking through the presentation, you are welcome to type in your questions in the Q&A box, and you should see that on your Zoom screen. There's a little icon that looks like this on the right-hand side that says Q&A. So you're welcome to type in your questions at any time, and at the end of our presentation, we'll have that question and answer period, and we'll run through each of the questions that you've typed in. I also wanted to mention that this meeting is being recorded, and we'll be posting this to the study website for anyone that wasn't able to join us here today. So in terms of our agenda, wanted to step through our corridor study process. I'll also show a map of our study area, and then we'll talk through the needs and objectives that we've identified for the corridor. And next, we'll talk through the improvement options that we've identified. And then lastly, we'll talk about next steps in the study and the remaining items to finish up our corridor study. So starting out with a little bit of an overview of the corridor study planning process, mention that MDT is conducting a planning study to understand the needs in the corridor before developing and constructing an individual project at some point in the future. If a project is advanced, MDT would follow all of the formal steps in the project development and construction process that we're showing here in this graphic. So steps 2 and 3, and but for right now, we are focused on the planning phase, so on the left-hand side of this graphic. We are targeting study completion later this spring, and we've had a number of different activities involved in this corridor study. First of all, we developed a baseline understanding of existing and projected conditions to identify concerns, and then using that data along with input from the tribes, resource agencies, stakeholders, and the public, we have defined needs and objectives for the corridor, and I'll share those in our presentation today. We've also identified initial improvement options that MDT and partners could pursue in the future as funding allows, and I'll present those today as well. And then finally, we'll be compiling all of our work in a corridor study to document our process and the findings and recommendations. Public comments that we receive as part of the process will be considered before the study is finalized. So next up, I wanted to touch on our study area. For this study, we are focused on the portion of US 93 between Polson and Summers, as we've illustrated here in the figure to the right-hand side. The southern portion is located within the Flathead Reservation, and we've shown that in this brown color. The study corridor does overlap between both Lake and Flathead counties, and also passes through several communities along the western shore of Flathead Lake. And just also wanted to acknowledge that the corridor is really rich in natural and cultural resources that are highly valued by residents and visitors alike. So, based on the evaluation of our existing and projected conditions in the corridor, plus all of the feedback that we've received from initial outreach efforts, we've identified two primary needs for this corridor. So, first up, need one, the study is looking to improve safety, and we're aiming to reduce fatalities and serious injuries by minimizing things like animal vehicle conflicts, roadside hazards, and conflicts between vehicles. Secondly, a need is to improve corridor operations, and we'll do that by trying to accommodate existing and future travel demands, maintaining reasonable access to adjacent properties, and improving pedestrian and bicycle mobility and accessibility. In addition to these two needs, there are also a number of other considerations that can influence or constrain potential improvements in the corridor. And we've listed those out here on the bottom of our screen. So the study recognizes the importance of minimizing impacts to environmental and social and cultural resources, as we've listed out in these two bullets. Also important to provide multimodal transportation accessibility for all different kinds of modes. We need to consider things like construction feasibility, as well as the context and the function of the corridor, and all of the multi-jurisdictional interests in the corridor as well. Of course, funding is always a consideration, and no funding has been identified for improvements in the corridor just yet. So that is something to consider moving forward. And then lastly, wanted to note that it will be important to consider maintenance responsibilities and costs for all of the improvements that we're identifying. So this study is trying to balance all of these different considerations as we identify these improvements. So, to meet those needs and objectives, our next step was to identify potential corridor improvements. And we've categorized these into three different groups. First up, the spot improvements. These are focused on a single location. Next up, we have corridor-wide improvements, and it might be the same type of improvement, but we've identified that in multiple locations throughout the corridor. And then lastly is a group called policy improvements. So I'll step through each one of these on the next couple of slides. So first up, looking at spot improvements. So again, we're looking to enhance safety, operations, and provide reasonable access throughout our corridor. And we have a number of these different spot improvements to help us do that. On the map on the right-hand side, we've called these out with green call-out boxes. S represents the spot improvements, and then we've just numbered them sequentially. So starting with S1 at the southern end of our corridor, all the way up to S8 at the northern portion of our corridor. And these improvements involve a number of different features and components. We're looking at roadway grades, looking at different passing zones, in some cases looking at constructing a center two-way left turn lane. We've identified several locations where we're proposing pedestrian improvements. Those are in the Elmo area and in Lakeside and in Summers, where there's a lot of pedestrian activity. We've identified those pedestrian accommodations. There are a couple of intersections where we're proposing some improvements. Those include the Montana 28 intersection in Elmo, as well as the Adams Street intersection in Lakeside and the Montana 82 intersection just north of Summers. And a lot of different things relating to those intersections, but things like adjustments to the type of traffic control or adding new traffic control. Also looking at how access enters into those intersections as well. So quite a number of different spot improvements that we've identified for the corridor. So next up, I'll talk through the corridor-wide improvements, and we've shown these starting with the letter C, and again scattered throughout our entire corridor, with some of these occurring in multiple locations. And there's really quite a range of these improvements as well. Some of them are lower cost items such as signing and striping improvements or rumble strips, all the way ranging up to more costly improvements such as shoulder widening or constructing brand new passing lanes and also addressing rockfall hazard locations. So quite a long list of these different corridor-wide improvements. And what I'll point out in the map is you can see, for example, that they do occur in these multiple locations. So in places where we have some narrow shoulders, we're proposing to widen those as much as feasible. And we've located those throughout different locations where they are currently too narrow. The other thing I wanted to point out with this map, in the top right-hand corner, we have some additional improvement options that are corridor wide, but we have not illustrated them on this map. So things like considering turn lanes at certain spot locations where they're warranted based on traffic volumes and crash data. Looking at passing and no passing zones, making sure that we have appropriate striping in the corridor to ensure safety in those passing areas. We're looking at turnouts for slow-moving vehicles, and we've identified a couple of locations for those. We're also proposing some high visibility improvements just to better delineate the roadway, especially during dark and nighttime conditions, and then looking at some advanced warning signs as well. The next one, C9 here, is Intelligent Transportation Systems, or ITS, and that involves using technology to communicate conditions with drivers. We have an improvement option looking at cultural signage to educate about the history and cultural significance in the corridor. And then finally, we've listed out wildlife vehicle conflict mitigation, and that could range from smaller scale improvements such as signing and detection, all the way up to a grade separated crossing with fencing. So a long list of improvement options that we've identified that could occur in multiple locations throughout the corridor. Next slide, I wanted to touch on our policy improvements that we've identified as well. So starting out with P1, our access management, the study is proposing that we implement a plan to reduce conflicts and maintain highway operations as development or reconstruction occurs in the corridor. So policy relating to access management, these strategies would include things like either relocating or combining or eliminating existing accesses, still making sure that reasonable access is provided to properties, but trying to minimize the number of accesses and the number of conflicts on the highway. I'll mention too that as part of this corridor study, MDT is developing an access management plan, and that will be a supplement or an appendix to our final plan. Another policy that we're proposing relates to speed considerations. Now, there have been several speed studies that have been conducted in the corridor, but we're proposing to take another look at things like the potential for nighttime or seasonal variation in speeds. I feel like that could be really appropriate just based on the seasonal variation in traffic, as well as wildlife conflicts in the corridor. The other option would be to consider some spot speed zones, especially in some developed areas near Elmo, for example, Big Arm. There are some areas that might benefit from consideration of some spot speed zones. Policy number 3 is looking at transportation demand. So right now we have a lot of heavy traffic volumes during the morning commute and evening commute time periods. And one idea from a policy perspective would be to encourage drivers to travel at different times of the day, and perhaps using alternate work schedules or work from home if possible, or using transit, just generally trying to avoid those dusk and dawn time periods that are high traffic volumes, and we can see a lot of conflicts with wild animals during those times as well. And then our last policy is looking at maintenance of the highway corridor. This is something that MDT already does, and it relates to both winter maintenance, removing snow and ice from the highway, but also just regular seasonal maintenance, maintaining pavement markings and signage, et cetera, in the corridor. So MDT will continue to address those items, but also look to implement new technologies and best practices as it relates to maintenance. So that rounds out our proposals in terms of the improvement options for the corridor. At this stage of our study, we are looking for your feedback on these proposals. So just wanted to point out that in addition to providing comments and questions to us today, there are several online opportunities to submit comments. So on the study website, two different areas that we've pointed out here. First, on the right-hand side, you can click on this link to submit a comment, and it'll bring you to a form where you can type in your comment and send that directly to MDT. The other option is to click on this link for an interactive commenting map. And on the next slide here, I have a couple of screenshots from that map. So when you click that link, it'll bring you here, and you'll see a representation of all of the improvement options that I've just talked through in this presentation. And you can click on those in the map and learn a little bit more information, and then you can add your comment relating to those improvement options. So hopefully this is a convenient way to both learn about the improvement options as well as provide your comments. And we will be reviewing all of the comments that we receive from the public before we finalize the study. One thing to note too, there is a filtering. So on the back end, once you submit your comment, that is submitted to MDT, reviewed, and then at just a slight delay there before it's publicly visible to everyone. So in terms of our next steps with this study, today's virtual public meeting concludes our public outreach for this month. There will be one final opportunity though. So we'll be considering all of the feedback that we receive on these proposed improvement options and then develop a draft report that we'll make available for public review this spring. And we'll make sure to notify everyone on our study contact list when that report is available. And that will be a final opportunity for public input before we finalize the corridor study and the access management plan. Looking further ahead, MDT will be focused on identifying funding for the improvements that we've outlined in the study before moving forward with project development and construction. So as I mentioned, no funding has been identified at this time for any of the improvements. So that'll be a key next step, will be to identify funding. I wanted to mention too, this is the last slide of our presentation here. So wanted to point you to our website. You can either type in this address here at the bottom, or you can take a photograph of this QR code, and that will bring you directly to our study website where you can learn more information and submit your comments. So with that, we'd like to turn next to our question and answer period for today. And again, just welcome everyone to submit your questions. Type those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Once you hit submit, we'll be able to take a look at those and we can read those out to everyone on the call. And we'll be able to respond right here during our session. So we'll pause for a couple minutes and just allow folks to type in any questions or comments that you have to share with the group. And Carrie, maybe you can give us an update. I don't think I'm seeing any questions or comments quite yet.
Yes, I was just about to unmute and give you an update. I am not, oh, one just came in as I was speaking. So this is from Jeff Hansen, and he asked, how is it that Adams Street in Lakeside, a relatively straightforward and low problem intersection, is a targeted intersection, but the intersection of the merger of Stone Loop, Blacktail Road, and US 93 appears to be ignored? This is the biggest nightmare in town. Have you thought about a roundabout there? Although he hates roundabouts with a passion, this is one place that could benefit from one. Also, what about the bridge over 93 at Volunteer Park for pedestrians?
Thanks so much for that question. So multiple parts here that we'll just try to step through. So first of all, Adams Street was identified in part because it's right in the center of the city and it has a lot of pedestrian activity. We just have a lot of activity in that central portion of Lakeside, plus of course traffic volumes and a lot of different turning movements. So that is one that was identified for the study. And as traffic volumes grow, and as the community continues to grow, we're anticipating that spot might meet what's called warrants for a potential traffic signal. So that is one location that we did identify. The other intersections that you identified, so Stoner Loop, Blacktail Road, I wouldn't say that we have ignored these locations, but I'm going to turn back to our corridor study or corridor-wide improvements. So one thing that we've identified turn lanes at spot locations. We haven't illustrated these on the map, but it is something that we would look at for individual intersections to see if they might be warranted, just to address either traffic volumes and or crashes or safety concerns. So that is certainly something we could consider. And in our reporting for that turn lane option, Blacktail Road was one of the spots that we identified at a preliminary level. So it might be that a northbound left turn lane might be warranted, but again, would need to continue to look at those turning volumes and roadway geometrics there to make some improvements. I will also note too that we've had lots of conversations with Flathead County, and Blacktail Road was absolutely one of the locations that the county had mentioned as well as an area that needs to be addressed. Let's see, a couple other points from the question here. So roundabouts, I'll just say that roundabouts can be a very effective solution in the right location. It's kind of a case by case basis and really depends on, again, the traffic volumes and the safety history, the crash history in that location. They do have a big footprint, and we also need to think about accommodating pedestrians and trucks and all the different modes that use the highway. So we can look at roundabouts, but they need to be placed in the right locations. Last component of that question, I think, was looking at a sky bridge over 93 at Volunteer Park for pedestrians. So looking at grade separation for pedestrians can be a great idea, and certainly those are developed and provided at different locations around the state. We do know that Volunteer Park is a really popular spot, and there's a lot of pedestrian activity. Those types of structures can be very costly. They also have a pretty big footprint because we have to provide accessible way for people to get up to and over the highway. So definitely something to consider further. But thanks so much for that question and those comments.
Thanks, Sarah. That was really helpful. So the next question is from June Jackson, and she said, I don't see anything being addressed in the Table Bay section of 93. Pulling out of my driveway into traffic going 70 miles per hour is very dangerous. And Sarah, the Table Bay area is around reference point 91, 92.
Okay. Thanks, Carrie, and thanks so much for this question that came in. So, as you can imagine, this is a pretty common experience that there are quite a few driveways intersecting US 93 throughout this corridor. And we hear from a lot of folks that turning onto US 93 can feel unsafe or just concerning, just given the number of cars going by, the high traffic volumes, as well as the high speeds in certain locations. And what's challenging is that when we have a single driveway that might serve one or just a few residents, it's hard to make an improvement at every one of those driveways where we hear these same concerns. Something that we can do, though, is look at access management. And so, as I mentioned, as part of this study, MDT is developing an access management plan. And what we can do with that is look at opportunities for potentially consolidating, maybe realigning, relocating, or combining with nearby accesses. And what that does is if we can consolidate and have multiple residents or multiple streets joined together and then just a single access point onto the highway, we're increasing the volume at that location, and we're increasing the traffic volumes and the warrants then for a potential turn lane at that location. So that is something that we can definitely consider is look at the access management aspect of things. We are also looking again at those turn lanes at specific locations, primarily though at public roads or locations where there's a much higher traffic volume in an individual spot.
Great segue into the access management. Thanks, Sarah. The next question is from Janice, and she asked if the study involves US 93 at Rocky Point Road, just west of Polson.
Thanks for that question, Janice. And the study actually starts just after Rocky Point Road. I know that's a heavily traveled roadway and some concerns in that location, but it is not officially included in our study.
Great. We have heard that one quite a few times. So from Thompson, he asked, in the environmental and social cultural analysis, are you planning to assess not only primary and direct impacts, but also secondary or indirect or cumulative impacts?
Yes, great question. Thanks for that. So for this study, we're still at the planning level. So what we've developed is what's called an environmental scan, and we took a look to identify the kind of baseline conditions. So trying to identify environmental and social and cultural resources that we know about based on available information. We did not conduct field surveys or additional research. It's more compiling the information that's available at this time. However, if MDT moves forward with a specific project, then more detailed environmental analysis would occur. And that's when MDT would be required to develop environmental documentation, and they would have more information about the type of project impacts that could be anticipated once that project is defined. And so that would all be outlined in an environmental document based on the project. And to specifically answer your question, it would look at direct plus indirect and cumulative impacts at that time.
Thank you. That's helpful. June did follow up and said that reducing the speed limit in the Table Bay area would abate some of the noise concerns from semis jake braking as they're trying to reduce their speed going downhill. So just a comment there.
Yes, thanks for that, June. And yes, so the speeds in the corridor, I mentioned that there have been several speeds studies conducted, and so speed limits have been set and are posted, but we are proposing consideration for some additional studies that would look at the possibility of reducing speeds during nighttime or perhaps on a seasonal basis. And in some spot speed zones. So that might be an opportunity to consider some lower speeds in certain areas.
Excellent. This is a comment from Maggie Davis. She says, Flathead County has refused to approve or participate in allowing developers to provide sidewalks adjacent to Highway 93 in Lakeside, although improving pedestrian safety would be greatly enhanced by providing continuous sidewalks on both sides of the highway.
Thanks for that comment, Maggie. And yes, we absolutely recognize that additional pedestrian accommodations are needed in Lakeside. I'm going to turn next to our spot improvements. So the S6 Lakeside improvement that we've identified, we've got kind of two different portions or components to that spot improvement. First up, the pedestrian accommodations that we're proposing would be extending the existing sidewalk and curb and gutter in some areas just to enhance access through town. And this would be more of a maybe a near-term potential opportunity. A longer-term option would be full reconstruction through Lakeside using an urban typical section. And so, again, this would include curb and gutter and sidewalk and making sure that there are continuous accessible sidewalks on both sides of the highway. Really think that that could help things and appreciate your comment, Maggie, about pedestrian accommodations in Lakeside.
Thanks, Sarah. Right now, I'm not seeing any additional questions and answers, but maybe we can give it a few more minutes to see if any. Oh, there's another one from Thompson, following up on his comment about environmental impacts, asking specifically about noise impacts. There have been quite a number of good recent studies on the effects of noise on wildlife. Also, the relationship between decibel levels and both speed and width of pavement.
Great comment. Yes, thank you for that. And you're absolutely right that noise certainly has an impact from all of the vehicles traveling on the highway. One thing that MDT has to do is as they are looking at new improvements that they construct, noise is one of the resource areas that has to be addressed during an environmental document process. So that is absolutely something that would be considered in the future.
Great. So the question box is still open. If anybody else has any additional questions to add, we can hang on for a few minutes here, right, Sarah?
Yes.
Alrighty, one from Catherine. They arrived late to the meeting, so they're saying that they live in Dayton and they're wondering if there's any consideration for lowering the speed limit in that area, noting that it's treacherous turning into Dayton while driving south on 93, as well as the noise from the higher volume of vehicles in that area.
Thanks, Catherine, for that question. So yes, mentioned that there have been some speed studies that have been conducted in this corridor, and so for the most part, the posted speeds have been updated and are set. But what our study is proposing is to consider additional studies that would look at things like nighttime variations or seasonal reductions in speed, just based on the activity in the summertime and the difficulty detecting wild animals, for example, in the dusk and dawn time periods. So potential for conducting additional studies that might look at either a nighttime or a seasonal variation in those speed limits. The other option might be to consider some spot speed zones, and Dayton certainly could be one of those, just to see if there would be some potential for lowering speeds in certain discrete locations in the corridor.
Great. I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time. We might have another one or two trickle in. We'll see. Maybe, Sarah, we could just give another plug for the interactive commenting map on the website.
Yes, I will do that. So just as a reminder to everyone, a couple different ways to submit comments after today's virtual meeting. So again, on our website, you can click on the commenting form and type in a comment, or you can click on the interactive commenting map link, which will take you here, and you'll see a visual map showing you all of the improvement options that we've talked about today. You can click on those, learn a little bit more information, and then submit a comment or concern that you might have. So welcome any comments that you have after today as well. And I'll just scroll here to the last slide where we have our study website. So you can type in this address or take a picture of this QR code with your phone, and that'll take you right to our study website with more information.
Great. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. So I'll leave it up to you if you want to hang
Okay.
on for a minute or not. Oh, one more. Just reiterating that the speed limit is too high on the entire route with all the new people living here, all the people coming in.
Thanks, Catherine. Yes, and we have heard this comment. There's a lot of concern just about the speeds, but also about how the corridor is continuing to develop and change as new folks come to the area and the corridor continues to develop. So thank you so much for that comment. That is definitely something that we've heard.
Alrighty, that's all I see.
Okay, well, thanks, Carrie, and thank you to everyone who joined us for today's virtual meeting. Really appreciate your time and your thoughtful comments and questions. We encourage you again to take a look at the website, submit any additional comments or questions that you have, and we'll be considering all of those before we develop the draft corridor study. And all of the folks that joined us today, if you provided your email address, we'll add you to our study contact list, and we'll make sure to notify everyone once our draft report is available for public review. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.